Welcome to today's session. My name is Dat Win, and we're here back with Kim Chan. And today we have a very special guest, Clint Werts. Clint, we'd like to introduce yourself to everyone who doesn't know you here.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dat. My name is Clint. I'm the CFO at Cove Animal Health. I've served at 3 different companies as a CFO, all in the veterinary space. And I kind of pride myself on establishing and growing, scaling businesses.
If you can share a little bit more about how, in your experience, what have you seen in small businesses and what kind of challenges that they face?
Each phase, as I've kind of developed my career and gone through these experiences a few times, I definitely have developed a philosophy of the phases of business, right? You have a startup phase. That is, whatever your role is everything. And so I look at it as you're a Swiss Army knife. You just kind of pick out the tool that you need that day and you start doing it. Your IT, your HR, your finance, you just have to do it all because there's nobody else to do it. It's whoever you've partnered with and maybe a few people you can scrap together pretty quickly. And obviously that's a really tough, time-intensive effort, as we've gone through this a couple of times. Like you're just bootstrap and stuff. I call it you're MacGyvering. A lot of duct tape and fishing wire and just trying to get stuff together. So that is a challenge in and of itself. When you're talking about recruiting people and systems and tools, like you just can't implement. You can't hire fast enough. You can't implement fast enough. Everything is a sprint as quickly as you can because you're not talking about optimizing. You're like, I need a financial system. Like I need to process some invoices. Like I need to do this like right now. And so that's a huge challenge because what you find when you get into that next kind of adolescent phase is, well, you didn't take the time you needed to implement that system properly, or you didn't. And so now you've got challenges of, okay, now what am I going to do? How do I get to that next step with my systems, with my processes, and with my people, right? Because someone who's willing to take a startup job may not be the same person that wants to head into that kind of $50 to $150 million of revenue sort of phase. They may not be interested in that, or they may not be able to scale both from a culture perspective or from a quality or volume of work perspective. And so those challenges all come into play. And then you get into that kind of 150 plus million. And now you're talking, you have heads of departments, you've got subject matter experts in things. Now you need to be implementing systems that can scale you to $1 billion of revenue, right? Like you've got to be able to get there because you're already operating, at least in my business, with 1,000 employees. You've got 1,000 employees, you got a lot of people. You need systems that are probably larger than your revenue would justify, but you have a lot of people because we're a service business. And so lots of different challenges at each phase for sure.
Hi, everyone. If you found this helpful, please subscribe. Your support helps us create more free content. Now back to the show.
Kim's newsletter mentioned about hiring like your spouse, your niece, your nephew in the convenience of the early days of a startup. Tell me about y'all experience if y'all would like to share where y'all seen something set up like this. How long does something like this could it even last for?
It can last for a long time that way. And, I think a lot of founders, owners, as they scale, they start to think through like, well, it's been working. Why would I change it? And then you realize the most senior person in your accounting department was a bookkeeper when you were like less than $10 million of revenue, and you're struggling to understand like what did these numbers mean. And for some businesses that are lower margin or lower EBITDA percentage businesses, those are harder to make investments in because essentially you have to like overhire right, to bring them over. And I can tell from Clint's reaction to that, he's probably had to think through that a few times, especially to attract talent when your brand isn't as large. So I mean, there's a lot of that. And then I think also on the reverse side, not just organizationally, from what Clint had highlighted, the founder has to let go, and that's probably the hardest thing, right? Finding people to trust, finding people that you believe can take over some of those duties. So I mean, that is a big one that I think a lot of founders struggle with. They just kind of get in their own way.
Want to outgrow that talent of that initial spouse and nephew and niece. What does it actually look like or happen at the enterprise level? What we say are some of the tall tale signs that this needs to happen?
The founders usually can tell, like, hey, there's problems happening, right? Like their niece or nephew or whatever is in some role, and problems are happening kind of around there, but they have a really hard time like putting their finger on, oh, it's actually that Susie's not capable of doing it at this level, right? And that's a hard realization to come to, is, oh, it's actually my niece or my cousin or whoever that is, right? And so a lot of the role that I've played in helping these founders grow is, how do you gently and tactfully bring up and talk to them about, hey, we've got some challenges, and really most of the time explaining the process that I just explained of, like, there's phases of business and there are certain people who are good at certain phases. It's not that Susie is bad at her job. Susie's just not experienced at this level of work and is struggling to keep up. And so we're going to need to make a change. We're going to need to bring in other people. We're going to, and so just like Kim talked about, do you have to overhire? If you can't, can you even do that in a low margin business? I'm fortunate to be in a, relatively decent margin business. And so, yeah, we can hire somebody and then make that change with that person. But it's the same thing. Like, they get used to this, a bookkeeper, whether it's family or someone that's been with them for 30 years, processing payroll or doing whatever. And they can do it for 100 people, but they can't do it for 1,000 people. And it's the same discussion. They feel the same way. It is extraordinarily painful of how to navigate through that. You can see the pain in their eyes, and it's not comfortable for anybody.
What would you say is the best way for you to kind of approach those business owners to have that gentle conversation, to be very tact, and to be able to have those tough conversations with those family members are the initial start? Yeah,
the most success I have found is doing what I said of, like, hey, Susie's struggling at this level. She's great at what she was doing, but she's really struggling at this level. And usually I don't do that until I've already talked to Susie and Susie's feeling uncomfortable, right? Like because she knows she's not, and I just made up Susie, but he or she, they know they're not doing well. They're not comfortable in the situation that they're in, but they don't want, without fail, every single time I've run into this, they don't want to let down the founder. Like, it's not that they don't want to leave. They almost without fail, they want to go do something else. They are not comfortable. I've only had one instance where they haven't been like, it's time for me to go.
Yeah.
But they don't want to let them down. And then the founder's feeling like, I can't get rid of my, Susie, that I can't do that. And so it's just trying to get them together and, like, Susie, I need you to be honest with the founder, and founder, I need you to have a conversation with Susie and just say, how are you feeling? Like, I hear you're struggling, and just have an open and honest conversation. That can be harder to get people to be honest with each other than it is to get them separately to admit that they're struggling.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, if if you don't have the relationship, or the relationship is either rocky, or that person doesn't recognize it, doesn't have the self-awareness, or the founder doesn't have the awareness on it. We've had clients where we've gone through and done some organizational design work, where you talk about your current capabilities, you talk about what your future capabilities need to be, and then kind of explaining that to that organizational level. Usually that can just lead them to, like, I have no idea how to run a financial planning and analysis department, or I have no idea how to do business intelligence, reporting, analytics. I don't, and that will be kind of self-fulfilling if they just don't understand that. That's another way to kind of trigger the same type of conversation that Clint mentions.
What are some of the pitfalls that you both have seen where the owner doesn't want to make that transition, or doesn't want to be able to move forward? What are some of the things that you see like a company would actually struggle after that?
Also, without fail, every single time, there is one person that the founder will not let go of. And it's never a family member, actually. It's always there's somebody. I don't care if it's an operations person, a finance person, and whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. There's somebody in there that I don't know, they've hitched their wagons to each other and they will go down in flames. And that person usually ends up causing a lot of disruption in the business because they don't fit, whether it's culturally or capability wise or whatever that is. They hold on to the past, and there's a lot of disruption. And I have had that every single time. And it's a big challenge, because when you get to the phase where you can start bringing on some really good and talented people, those talented people have a hard time picking up the slack, or at least just managing or dealing with that one person who's a cultural nightmare, or performance nightmare, or whatever that is. And they know they're untouchable, and it's something you have to navigate. You've got to manage the people that you've brought in that are talented, that are strong, that are going to be the people that are going to carry you forward. And I'll be honest, I have not been as successful in navigating. Like, usually that person just hangs on until the founder leaves, like whatever that first recap is, or that whatever, like they're linked together until they go together.
Yeah. And I'd add that it normally requires a large event, external event, for that to change. So either the founder leaves, the company gets acquired, there is a major lawsuit, or they have a key hire, like a CFO that comes in, helps for the first 6 months, and then is like, I can't work with Susie. And
poor Susie.
Yeah. Poor Susie. But yeah, usually it requires an outside event like that for some founders to change. Some just end up, or many exit.
You mentioned before that building up a financial organization, you have to do it through the eyes of a CFO, Kim. What can you share a little bit more about what you mean about that?
Yeah, I mean, experienced CFO will have other organizations that they've been a part of. Like I've worked with a CFO who inherited a pretty large team, 150 employees within their company, and trying to understand what each person did. The Susies of the world, they just grew up with the business doing kind of everything. So when he inherited the company, he wanted to implement a financial system, and prior to that, we sat down and we talked about getting help for him organizationally, trying to figure out, do you have specialized departments, which is best in class in many finance organizations? And he's like, I don't. So we spent about a year kind of redesigning everything, right? So having specialized departments, what does accounts payables do? What does accounts receivables do? What does fixed assets do? What does FP&A do? And then there's actually new departments formed: strategic finance, operational finance. But a lot of that was because we looked at like I said earlier, capabilities. What do they do? And unpacking that. And then, you may have to move Susie to another department because she's actually way better at doing that there. And then you may have to hire outside because just no capability within that bench of talent. And there's no successors, which is even worse in an organization. Hi, everyone. If you found this helpful, please subscribe. Your support helps us create more free content. Now back to the show.
Well, Clint, you've built a lot of finance teams and inherited them through acquisitions. What's your approach to building a finance organization, and how do you normally structure that?
Yeah, I usually start pretty quickly into at least creating the semblance of what Kim was talking about, of that departmental structure. And so that when I get to that next phase, because I'm usually starting out smaller, like I'm starting with either brand new businesses, or, we've got 10 locations, or, with the first acquisition, we've got, like this one, we started with 5. Our first acquisition, we brought on 5. There's nothing. So, but if you start out with the end in mind, where you're going, and I've had the benefit of working in multi-billion-dollar revenue companies as well as startups, and so I have seen the maturation of a business, and so I do definitely start with the end in mind. And if you have the luxury of basically convincing really talented people that can scale with you to come on early, and there's lots of ways, everybody's motivated differently, whether it's a resume building opportunity, or equity in the company, if that's an option for you. Different things can help bring people in, but I really try to, can I bring a controller in immediately that will last me to $1 billion in revenue? That's a long runway, and that's somebody who's taking a really small job, who's going to do a lot of hands-on work in the beginning, that probably isn't super excited about doing all that hands-on work in the beginning. They're just not. Conversely, you can start with, okay, instead of a controller, I'm not going to do that at all. I'm going to bring in an accounting manager who may or may not be able to scale into my controller or not. So I really do try to kind of start with the end in mind of whatever the best talent that I can bring in. And I have learned the hard way over the years, you bring in the best talent, period. You hire the most talented person. I am a huge fan of, if they're not quite qualified for the job that you're going to give them, but you're like, this is Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, whatever, you just bring them in. They're not ready, but that person will learn, adapt. They're going to work hard. They're going to do whatever it takes. And so if you can build your team with those sorts of people, that's what you're looking for. I tell people the story when I'm trying to convince someone like that to join, is there's a cartoon movie that my kids loved when they were young. It's called Robots, and it stars Robin Williams as one of the voices in the movie. If you haven't seen it, great movie. It's about innovation. The kind of lesson learned in the movie is about innovation is see a need, fill a need. So see a need in the world and fill the need with innovation. And if you can fill your team with people with that attitude and mentality, you can start to span phases of the business with those types of people, because they're just going to pick up whatever needs to be done and be successful.
What would you say in that conversation to that owner who just cannot get over the hump of setting aside that budget to hire in another position?
Founders typically are very, very budget conscious, right? So a lot of it has to do with just what Clint has said, right? Like, if we hire somebody at this level and they don't work out, or they have no growth potential, right, you're going to be struggling. So it's really explaining and sharing the vision with them, because sometimes the cost up front is going to be actually cheaper than what you're going to be paying long term.
Yeah, explaining the cost of turnover, even we all know it's impossible to actually calculate the cost of turnover. Like if we had a magic wand, that's what one of the things I would wish for is like, what is the cost of turnover? Because then I could really articulate exactly, but helping people understand as you turn people over, especially with a small business or a growing mid-sized business, like it's painful when you turn leaders over. And so really trying to get the right people in those seats. And if you have to pay a little extra to get the right people in those seats, it's worthwhile. The other thing to talk them through, if you're in a scenario where you know the company's going to sell somewhere down the road, right? In whatever recap window that is, you have to talk to them about and put the numbers together for them of what does it look like from here to there, like, and show them benchmarks like, hey, my HR department in this industry should be 2% of revenue. Well, when we get to recap, it's going to be 2% of revenue. We're going to hit that. But right now, we're going to have to overinvest a little bit to get us there, right? And talk to them about how that can accelerate the timeline, because we're going to bring in really high quality people. And instead of recapping in 5 years or 7 years, we're going to recap in 4, because we're going to bring in all these people, these specific people, and get them involved in the process of hiring and whatever. Like, these are talented people. They're going to accelerate your timeline. And that's usually the most successful tact right there is like, oh, we're going to do it faster. Oh, okay. That speaks to them.
The same themes that Clint highlights, like at the enterprise level, you're doing very similar pitches of, okay, we need to develop this department. We need to have a different head of that department. And then, I'd say the hardest part, I think, as you get into an enterprise organization, you're looking at resumes, you're looking at so many that have big titles, big names on them. And then you realize, the one side that I don't like about hiring in a large organization is you tend to trend to those brand names. And then you bring them on and they interview extremely well. You bring them on and then you realize, this person hasn't had hands-on experience. He or she has had, Susie, right? has had, 30 people underneath them that did all the work. Yeah. And shared the vision and progressed them through the strategy versus them coming in and helping reshape a department and helping them drive the strategy, or finding people that they can bring on that will help them drive the strategy. So that it's a bit of apples and oranges, but there still is similarities. I think the pockets are deeper for sure at the enterprise level, but the pain points are somewhat the same, but then you get more pain points, I think, at the enterprise level.
Yeah, in a small business, and I know Kim's talking about the larger enterprise businesses, but in a small business, I actually, the brand name schools and consulting firms and whatever, that's actually a negative when they're interviewing, because they're very strategic. Like I'm not saying they're not useless. They're useless. They are very useful in the right situation, but they typically lack hands-on operational experience. And I've not had a lot of success. So I definitely shy away from them in the, kind of smaller to mid-sized business. And then they have their role in place in those enterprise businesses. Like Kim talked about, strategically, they're very strong. And typically good culture people from a leadership perspective, typically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How will you explain the biggest mindset shift that you have to go from SMB to enterprise to start thinking on enterprise level?
Here's a good example. I'd worked with one of the largest consulting strategy firms in the world, and they were brought in to help us find opportunities in the digital space. And we were talking through developing digital strategy, and then we ended up talking through overall strategy. And Clint's going to laugh at this. It's like, they said, oh, well, if you free more time in the schedule, they'll see more clients. And it's like, no. And we literally got into an argument about it. And it's like, no, you know what they'll do? They'll leave on time, or they'll catch up on their work, or they'll go have lunch with like basic things, right? And they just could not wrap their head around it. Because we said we tried that for like 10 years, it didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And then you contrast that to working in small business, you're like, that's not going to work, because you have to do it. You have to manage it very closely. You have to work with the people like at that location. You have to understand, what is it going to take to actually get more production out of that place. So it's like you're looking at it bird's eye view as a concept, and then there's the practical reality of what happens on the ground floor.
Yeah, I'll add to that and then kind of flip back to your question too of with today's workforce, the motivations are very different. Like my generation and older, if you told me if I was like a producing person I'm an overhead in my organization, but if I was a producing person in my organization and you told me if you put in an extra hour, that means X for you from a dollars perspective, then I can weigh that and I will likely take advantage of that opportunity. Younger generations, the percentage that take advantage of that opportunity is probably the inverse. It's probably 75-25 of my generation and older that will take advantage of that. And it's probably 25% that will take advantage in the younger generation, just in my experience. And so they will do things like Kim talked about of they'll go home on time, or they'll, actually take a longer lunch, or they'll, do something else with their time that they value because they've got enough, or that doesn't motivate them. It's not enough money to motivate them. And in many cases, I have found there's very little amounts of money that will motivate them more. It has to be a lot more money to motivate somebody to put in that extra hour. And so I think that is just different kind of culturally in our workforce today than it has been in the past. And then back to your question of, well, then how are you looking at things from that small and mid-sized company and really scaling into the enterprise is now you're just dealing, you don't have the capability, in my opinion, at the enterprise level, or you don't. It's difficult to operate at that level of detail with each individual, to sit down with, like I work with doctors, to sit down with every doctor and talk about what's your motivation and how can we get you to be more productive and what are your barriers. And like, it's just so difficult, which is why I continue to go back to these small and mid-sized businesses, because I outperform the large businesses when you look at all the metrics, because I can go talk to every doctor. I can sit down and meet with them and understand their motivations, and I can tailor things to them that work. Like I have a great example that in my head that I always use is when I was at a larger business, we had a doctor that wanted to come on, and he's like, "Hey, I'll sign with you if you get me a ski pass. Like every year you buy my ski pass." And at a massive organization, multi-billion-dollar revenue, like to do something that individualized and that unique, and have somebody remember it the next year and the year after that, and like that we've agreed to this, and I mean, and getting the lawyers to agree to put it in a contract, and like, oh my gosh, that's just not a feasible thing to do. And so, but at my business, it's like, you want a ski pass? Great. We'll get you the ski pass. Like, did your wife want one too? Like, awesome. We will get you the ski pass, like done. And so we can tailor things like that. And it's just, those things are just, it's different, and it's more difficult at the enterprise level to be able to, really outperform, because the law of averages drags you down every single time.
Kim mentioned before in the newsletter that there are minor incidents of fraud that might have already occurred, but they simply weren't big enough or material enough to be caught. Could you explain that a little bit more, Kim?
This example actually did happen, but from a segregation of duties, which is basically making sure an end-to-end process isn't done by the same person or a group of people who can collude. It's harder as a small business owner, as even medium-sized businesses have a tendency to do this. When you're trying to apply something that's best in class at an enterprise level, you really can't afford to have 5 people executing a process. You have 1 person or 2 people that might execute the process. So there are other ways like mitigating controls, reports after the fact that you can actually look at. But as you're in a growth company, there are times where it's kind of like, especially if you don't have the right person in the role, they're going to feel like, oh, I deserve this. And usually that's what ends up happening is, if you can create a supplier, you can create an invoice, you can pay the supplier, and there's like literally nobody else touching that process. What's going to hold an employee back from making them a supplier and paying themselves, right? Literally nothing. So, you can have different ways of approaching that to help prevent some of this invisible risk that exists in the company. But typically, as you get larger and you get bigger, Susie, or maybe we should change the name to John or something.
Poor Susie.
We should change the name
let
to
everyone
John.
know we're not picking on Susie here. We love Susie.
I'm sorry.
Susie
it's my
has her
mythical
place.
person. Yeah.
No worries.
Let's say John, right? Like John has been in a small company, gets larger, they get to $100 million. Over the last 5 years of growth, he's been issuing himself checks for like $500, right? Right? Like every other week. And then, and then you can afford to bring in an auditor at that stage. Or if you're going to be, your exit strategy or your plan is to get bought out by a PE company or to be acquired by a larger company, that usually is found at that stage. And they're like, what is this? Why does John have a per diem for $500 every 2 weeks? And then, so those things, like if you have at least the thought in place on some type of internal controls, which a CFO would help kind of build that vision, you can at least try to put in guardrails and then put in more structure in place in your organization to prevent some of that risk.
Yeah, and I'm still in that kind of small phase, and that's where I am. I have a manager. I don't have I don't have a purchasing team. I don't have an AP team. I've got people, right, that do those things, and so there's a lot in those people. So I still review in detail all of the payments that go out every single week, and I look at them. And what are the chances if somebody's just cutting themselves a check for $500 a week or a month or whatever? What are the chances of me catching that? Pretty small, but they don't know that, and they know I'm looking, and so I make sure that I look at it, and every week or two I'll ask a question about a vendor, or why is this payment, or what is this, or who is this, or what's this for? Can you send me this invoice? And so just by asking a couple questions, the deterrence of just looking at it is, and it doesn't take me very long. I spend 3 minutes on it, but that deterrence for those people, I hope I can trust them. I think I can. I wouldn't have hired them if I didn't think I could trust them, but trust but verify. You're just forcing someone to have to collude with someone else. Like that's when you just boil it right down, you just want to make sure people can't steal from you by themselves and have that ability. They have to collude with someone else. And the minute you have to collude with someone else,
it's harder.
The risk becomes so high for them of having to talk to somebody about doing it. And, this isn't Office Space where you have all these people that, like we're going to steal the fractions of a penny or whatever. And you just so happen to have all 3 of your buddies that are in the right positions that are all motivated similarly. And like, that's just, the odds of that are small. And so you're just trying to create those scenarios where they have to collude.
Yeah.
And they always get greedy. And And Kim talked about like they eventually get caught. It's accounting. You it's not if, it's when. The numbers have to tie, things have to balance. Like eventually you will be caught. And it's usually sooner than it would normally be caught, because instead of $500, now it's 6, and then it's 7, and then it's 8. And they're going to push it because why not? And they eventually, it's big enough where we got you.
It's great to hear Clint talk about these things because he has a strong accounting background. I've met CFOs who have either very little accounting background, and they're really just focused on growth of the business and just being able to tell the story, especially to investors, right? Whether they're public or whatever, or it's PE backed or it's a board, they're just very good at that. But I've at least experienced fewer CFOs that have that they care about some of this accounting and internal controls. I mean, it can save the company a lot of money, especially on the EBITDA side, or cash flow, right? And cash flow is very important, especially as you're growing, small into a larger business. So, it's great to hear Clint, and I love it when I hear a CFO that does care about accounting.
With the amount of items that you have to review and go through, how do you maintain that balance between being efficient and just having control, like between efficiency and control?
I'm always about efficiency. That's my number one. And so in whatever I'm controlling, it's because I feel like I have to, not because I want to, because I have to. And a lot of times in my own mind, I'm like, I have a fiduciary responsibility to X, Y, and Z. And frankly, most of that is part of the job I don't like. The stuff that Kim was talking about of, visioning the future and talking to investors and what about recap and how do we drive growth and, get financing and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's the interesting stuff about my job. That's what I enjoy doing. Like, let's partner with operations and let's get run the business more efficiently and effectively. How are we getting metrics? All that stuff's fun. But the stuff that you have to do, that control piece, it is still part of your job. You've got to do it. And eventually it's great. I can delegate it eventually. That's wonderful. And I want to do it. I want to delegate that when I get big enough, but it is what it is. So I just think if you don't do it, you're going to end up with a situation that's going to be embarrassing at one point or not, or another in your career. And I had a mentor once tell me, he's like, look, part of your job is to keep your company out of the news. Like, that's part of your job. Stay out of the news. And fraud gets you in the news pretty quickly. And so stay out of the news.
Yeah.
Clint, what would you say is your most optimal dream review process for your internal controls? Like, if you were just to wave a magic wand, what would that look like?
Oh, well, I mean, it would be as I kind of grow that I've got I've got a controller that is high enough level, for example, that also doesn't need to have access to the systems because they're high level, more strategic person that can then take those review processes and do those things. Or having systems in place is critical. I invest pretty heavily in systems, even at an early age of the company's life cycle. And that can be a challenge of convincing people to do that. But you have systems, you have people, systems, and processes. And if you can put systems in place, you can scale more rapidly. Your processes can be more efficient, and people like to work in those systems as well, because then they're not doing all this terrible manual work. And then your internal controls are better as well because the systems dictate that. So you have to have a balance, because some systems require you to hire a lot of people to manage them or to manage that process that's in them. And that can be a challenge. And so you just have to find the right time to get into each of those systems. But I'm a huge I'm a huge systems guy. You've got to get the right tools in place, because that's how you scale a business. And again, my opinion has been, go in early, because you'll benefit in the long run. You just have to convince your investors that that you can go in early and tell that story of, I know this is what we're going to look like right now, but we're not trying to recap right now. We're going to try to recap in 3 years. And in 3 years, this is going to be better than it would have been otherwise.
I would add, I was actually having lunch with somebody who's in the M&A space, and their company does evaluations for, acquirers. And he was talking about an evaluation or a purchase price he was going through, and their systems were so poor, and they're going to devalue the enterprise value by like 30%. I'm just like, wow, people like Clint who see the vision of the future, you invest on it early, that it's going to be way less than that 30% that they're going to lose on the purchase price. So
100%, because I've been on the buying side and on the selling side, and if you don't look like you can scale, people then have to put that investment into their model, and that affects your valuation 100%. And so again, it's all a balance. You got to find the right balance, but 0 is not a good plan.
Could either of you share without naming names and keeping confidentiality, a challenge that you've seen a small business or a business have when they don't put these processes in place? What happens? What have you seen in your experience?
Yeah, I can talk about small business, and we can talk about enterprise too. But we have 2 clients right now that we are working with, that had like 2,000 to 4,000 unreconciled transactions. And in those smaller businesses, bank transactions usually are the kind of the trigger of recording expenses. So, they were operating with a partial picture, half picture, right? Looking at, what have I sold, right? What are my sales? And then instead of looking at their financial system, because they have all of these transactions, they're just like, oh, how much money do I have in the bank account? Oh, I'm good. Right? So, we were hired to help them with their financial systems. And, on the small side, there's a lot of good financial systems out there that, work well, that have a lot of automation. And then, as we started to implement some of those things, we've had the right conversations with them that I know Clint probably has too with his company, profitability, right? How much they're keeping, how much they're making, concepts like percent of sales, flow through, all of these things that, are you investing? How much does it cost for you to generate that dollar of revenue? Those are all concepts that owners need to understand if they want to grow. Otherwise, they don't know where to invest those dollars or how much financial freedom they have to actually do that. And then they start to realize, at least our clients are like, oh, wow, I've not had this conversation. and I love it. And they want more of it. So, I mean, it starts with those systems, making sure they actually work well, right? And they understand the effort it takes to actually keep them up. Should they be doing it themselves? No, but they should bring in somebody else, either an employee or an outside firm, to help them with it.
Yeah, I mean, perfect example right along those lines is if you're really going to be great, if your business is going to be great, you have to understand what your drivers are. And when you're managing your business on the outcome, you have no control over the process, right? It's not unlike sports. The process is practice. What is your process? How do you practice? The outcome is the game. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. But what's your process in order to try to have a good outcome? And I'll use an example I have right now that I'm dealing with live in my company is everyone has been focusing on how many headcount do I have at each location, so on and so forth. And I'm trying to drive everyone to, I don't care how many people work there. I want to know how many hours they work. Yeah. I pay them for the hours they work, not how many people we have on the roster. I don't really care. You can have 100 or you can have 2. But how many hours are they working per patient that I see, or per, doctor that we're supporting, or whatever. Like, what are those things? That's the process. That's the driver. And so when you have these small companies, they're often, because they don't have a system, or they don't have a process, they don't have a way to look at the drivers. They're looking at the outcome of how much cash is in my bank account, and am I good or am I not good, not knowing that they've got $1 million of liabilities outstanding that they owe for, and so then they're going to make some bad choices, and they don't understand their key drivers.
Yeah, and then at the enterprise level, I mean, you have all these resources. You have like a fancy BI dashboard. You have a scorecard, and there's so much emphasis on that output, the rearview mirror view. There's not a lot of emphasis on the input and understanding those levers to pull to actually get the result that you want. So it's definitely a lot harder at the enterprise level, but you got to figure out what are the inputs that you need to do, right? In Clint's case, if you're actually not there, you're not productive. So who cares, like, the number of people you have if they're just not there?
Yep. And I would add, at the enterprise level, I still think the biggest challenge in enterprise level business is focus.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got 1,000 metrics, which means you have none. And so are you really focused? Can you focus your business effectively at scale, at driving what really needs to be driven in your business and keeping people focused on it? Because there's always a bright, shiny new toy around the corner that everybody wants to turn around and focus on. And you still have to block, and you still have to tackle in your business. And that focus is very challenging. That's the number one issue, in my opinion.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Wow. Thank you very much for both of your incredible insight for this session. Before we leave in today's session, I would like to open up this question for the both of you. If you were to have any words of advice for that business owner, that founder who's just on the fence of making that transition and just ensuring that you put in the proper steps and processes in place, what would your advice be for them?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest advice to a founder that's kind of trying to make those decisions is, where do you want to be in the end? If you're focused on today so much, you're going to lose sight of the end of the road of what you're trying to get to. You can't get to your goals without some level of change or investment. You can't transform your business without that change. And so kind of letting go of that, it's going to change, and you have to, and be the change, right? Like, you can control change if you push the change. If you don't, then the change gets out of control, and the founder does not want to lose control. So you need, be the change, and then you'll still feel in control.
So this would be more for the consulting side, or for Premier. I mean, I find somebody that you can, at least you're willing to listen to or trust or build a relationship with. If you can't afford to hire them, hire like a full-time person that's from the outside. At least get a perspective, right, on whether or not you're crazy or if this is the right path. It's really important. If you can't afford a consultant, join like a peer group or something where you can get that type of at least thought leadership and challenge, because you're so hyper focused on growing the business, hyper focused on making profit. You're not going to have a well-rounded look or holistic view on things. It's just the reality. And it's always good occasionally to get that outside in view. And Clint, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate you being a guest for us this month. And, you've always been great to work with. So I really appreciate it.
Happy to. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank y'all very much. PCG offers a no-commitment 15-minute consultation to see if they're a good fit for your business. We'll link you that in the show notes. You can also send them your top 3 pain points, and they'll respond with possible solutions. If you found this conversation helpful, please feel free to subscribe for future episodes. Guidance from Premier Consulting Group is for informational purposes only and does not guarantee specific results. All actions are taken at company's own risk.